Hello and welcome to the book reading summary of April, May, and June. Yes, in the last video I did make an oops and I was mentioning March. Now today, thankfully, I do things old school. So because unfortunately Rogers is down yet again, I had to go through my notebook where I record what I've read, when I start it, when I finished it. Unlike my previous video where I could hop on to Goodreads and check it out, this time I had to go through my notebook and write down the titles. So as I always said to my students when I worked in an assistive software lab with technology, yes, technology is great and there's a lot of wonderful things it can do, but when it goes kabloop, you still need to have some tools and ways to get the job done. So I did print off some of my other summaries before. I need to get those all organized and printed off in my binder. So I did have my books for April. And it turns out that I only read 6 books in April. Obviously must have been busy doing some other things because as I mentioned in my other video, and I was quite surprised to notice, in February I read 19 books. Now granted, some of them were small, but still. After my TBR went off the rails and I didn't get back to my energy healing books, I started going down this Da Vinci, so many other directions spirals. What I read in April, another of the Brief History series. This one was on the Knights Templar. It's by Helen Nicholson. And I have a sticky note here that says it's an excellent resource. There's mystery, betrayal, adventure, power and greed, values versus no morals. So there's definitely a lot in this book, including the dates and the different events. It was definitely worth reading and one of the more enjoyable reads that I found about the Templars. The Huron Key by Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas is about the Freemasons, their history, the connections to ancient Egypt, as well as connections to the Knights Templar. I know when I first read this book a number of years ago, I thought it was very odd that there would be a book about the Freemasons, who are considered a secret society. So to have 2 of the members printing something seemed quite different to me. Now, they don't get into really specific particular things about the Freemasons, which makes sense, but they do give you a general idea about some of the thoughts that they have, where they believe their beginnings came from. So this again definitely ties in with the Da Vinci Code, the Knights Templar in particular. If you're curious about the Freemasons and how they got started and how some of that connects back to ancient Egypt, it's definitely worth the read. But as always, I recommend checking out titles through your public library first and deciding if it's something that you think you'll refer back to over time or if you'll even enjoy reading. The Essence of Gnostics. This is by Bernard Simon. As I mentioned in an earlier video when I think I was going through my piles or organizing the books, I can't say that at the end of this book I really understand what the Gnostics were about. I found it a bit confusing, and I'm actually just noticed there's a dragon on the title of this with the scales. Okay, that's pretty interesting. I've had this book for a while and I didn't actually notice that before, and here's his tale. Okay, cool. But either way, with this particular book, I can't say that I understand what Gnosticism is or what their beliefs were. It does lay out different things that have happened over time, different things that people say about other belief systems to try and dehumanize other people so that I guess it's easier to start difficulties between them. That's something I've also never understood. Just because my beliefs may not be the same as your beliefs, I don't see why that has to be such a big problem. But that's just me. There's a lot of things I don't understand about humans, even though I have a degree in psychology. So I am hoping that when I go through this again, I'll have a better understanding of what Gnostics were about. And as I mentioned before, that's nothing against Bernard Simon or his writing style. I did find it was easy to read and follow along. I just wasn't grasping the main point of the book, and that's me, not his writing. Genesis of the Grail Kings. This is one of 3 books that I have by Lawrence Gardner. The explosive story of genetic cloning, the ancient bloodline of Jesus. I do enjoy reading Lawrence Gardner. He goes off on a variety of different topics, making connections, and again, this one will, if I remember correctly, let's see. Hidden Secrets of the Tables of Testimony, Anti-Gravitational Science of the Pyramid Pharaohs, A History of God and the Lords of Eternity, Disclosures of the Phoenix and the Philosopher's Stone, so we get into alchemy, The Superconductive Powers of Monatomic Gold, A Genetic Key to the Evolutionary Missing Link. So we'll obviously have some information in here about Darwin and other people. Active Longevity and the Starfire Magic of Eden. I will be getting into more detail about this particular book, well, all of them down the road. But with this one, as I did with Realm of the Ring Lords and other books, Da Vinci Code, I'll have a mind web when I get into covering this book in more detail. Realm of the Ring Lords, I do think I showed the mind web that I had about this in an earlier video. May have been when I was going through talking about how all these piles of books kept growing and growing. So Realm of the Ring Lords, the myth and magic of the Grail Quest. And it definitely goes through a whole variety of subjects. This is under history and religion. As for the Genesis book, that one's considered history new age. So at the back, it says the magical history of the Ring Lords, alluded to in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, a series that I personally read, let's just say decades ago. And I enjoyed reading that, Tolkien's writing style, and I've since seen the movies numerous times. So it's been largely consigned to legend and half-remembered battles between good and evil. Shrouded in supernatural enigma, its legacy lives on in fascinating tales of fairies, elves, witches, and vampires. So yes, Dracula comes up in here again. Why do we sense deeper truths behind the mysteries of the Ring and the Grail? Why have their common enchantments been distorted and hidden? So he has some interesting ideas and theories presented here, making connections. and I'll get more into that in an upcoming video. The last book that I read in April, well, actually, the first book that I read, I didn't present them in the order I read them, was Finding Merlin. This is by Adam Ardrey, The Truth Behind the Legend of the Great Arthurian Mage. So unlike the other two books that I had read in March about King Arthur, this focuses specifically on Merlin. There's information about, of course, the Druids, different battles and events that were going on, the different names. You have different timelines that people look at. You have to remember where the different reports came from in terms of history. It's typically written by the winners, not the people who lost in the conflict or situation that was going on. So you always have to consider that. You also have to stop and consider, were the events recorded accurately? So as I just came up with the book that I'm reading on the moon, sadly, whoever that editor was missed a major flub. There's an incorrect year given on one of the pages. Now, I caught it because I'm paying attention and trying to connect the dots. How the person who got paid to edit that missed it, I don't know. But that gives you an idea of how easy it is for a mistake to be made and continue to be perpetuated, because consider the number of people who have read that book. If they weren't paying attention, they're just going to keep giving the wrong date. So whenever you're reading things, especially when it relates to the ancient past, you have to factor in what calendar are they using? Are they double checking their resources? What kind of research do they do? In other words, are they spending the time and really looking into the information, or are they just trying to get through something quick and pump it out there? That was my reading in April. May, and again, I don't have them in the particular order because I just quick went through my notebook and got the titles, so I didn't put them in order as I would have found them on Goodreads. We'll start with The Seat of the Soul, Gary Zukav. Not sure if I'm saying that correctly. I enjoyed reading this. There are a lot of good tips and points to consider. I need to go through it again. There are areas that I highlighted and marked. I have different things marked as quote. So for example, on page 120, he has here, your intentions create the reality that you experience. Until you become aware of this, it happens unconsciously. Therefore, be mindful of what you project. That's the first step toward authentic power. To me, that is very important because people don't stop to think about the energy and the feelings and the emotions that they're sending out, whether they're at work or shopping or visiting with friends. We all project, some consciously, some unconsciously. It could be good feelings, negative feelings. You need to be aware of where your mindset is and what is the information and feeling that you're wanting to project to someone else. So I really enjoyed that quote, and there are a number of mindful tips and pointers in terms of living a more joyful life, self-responsibility, self-empowerment, and that's truly the type of book that I enjoy reading. This will also be coming up in my next video about my book haul catch-up. So that goes in that pile. Another book that I read in May, The Sign and the Seal. This is by Graham Hancock. Now, the first book I read by Graham Hancock was Fingerprints of the Gods. There was a lot of information in it. I found it interesting. I can't say I enjoyed the setup because he tends to flip-flop back and forth in time frames, and I just find that confusing to follow. The Sign and the Seal does tend to follow a more linear time frame in terms of events and his discoveries. I learned quite a bit about Ethiopia, and this is one of the first books that I've read that kind of got into a bit of that country and the history. Hancock has a different take on what the Holy Grail is and connections with the Ark of the Covenant. So it was definitely a different take on what I'd been reading to this point. And like so many of the other books, which was the one perk to the Da Vinci Spiral, this had been sitting on my shelf for a number of years. I've read a couple of other books by Hancock. I just hadn't been interested in picking up and reading this one, although I've had it, like I say, for years. But this was definitely the time to read it because it connected in with all the other books in terms of the Templars, which he mentions, the Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, Ancient Egypt. So it was a timely read. Anatomy of a Haunting. This is by Lee Strong. I came across this at my thrift store during one of my little shopping adventures. The cover definitely is not what this story is about. I'm not sure why they picked that particular cover. If you enjoy reading about ghost stories and real life experiences, this may be a story you enjoy. One thing I did find interesting is they don't mention the actual small town where this happens. So unlike some of the other books, such as Holy Blood, Holy Grail, the movie The Conjuring, the Amityville Horror, suddenly you have people all flooding there because they're curious, they want to check it out. That's not something that's going to happen with this particular story. And it's trying to see, do I have here? This was printed in 2013, so it's 10 years old. And this story was actually published after the woman who had these experiences and had the property, and another woman had passed away. I'm not sure why he waited, why the author waited, but he did. And I have here, it's not demons or portals, it's twisted humans and earthbound spirits and belongings, and how all of that generated what happened in this particular home. The one thing, and unfortunately it comes up with a lot of these stories, whether it's the one particular property or the ghost stories, so often when these events happen, I always find it, I guess, curious or interesting why you would put that property up for sale, knowing what's potentially there. Let me know in the comments down below, what are your thoughts? Obviously, skeptics are going to say, well, of course you'd put it up for sale because there's nothing happening. Zecharia Sitchin, who I've mentioned, and I still have his Earth Chronicle series of books to read, but I did read this one by him. There were giants upon the earth, gods, demigods, and human ancestry, the evidence of alien DNA. And that comes up throughout a few of the different readings that I have. So I'll talk more about that. Just kind of glancing here what to go over. He has some interesting theories, and I'll definitely be taking a deeper look at this with some more detailed notes, because he really gets into a lot of different things. Of course, the Sumerian culture is a big part of it. So we'll talk more about that in the future. The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, Scott Alan Roberts. Part of why I picked this up, curious about the Nephilim, but there's also a comment here by George Newry, and I read George Newry's other books. Although I've never been up for Coast to Coast AM, a radio show that's on in the wee hours of the morning, I am very much aware of him. He's also a host on Gaia TV. I've seen a couple of the episodes, but I'm not really a big watch streaming stuff. So we don't have Gaia anymore, but I know his series, he talks to numerous people about a wide range of things. I'll get more into detail about George Newry and his show in that when I do a review of his books, Worker in the Light and Talking to the Dead. As far as Scott Alan Roberts, I have to say when I read this book the first time, it was a big disappointment. It isn't that his information varied from any of the other authors I've read. He's another one who, throughout the book, I was ready to get the screaming heebie-jeebies. I got it the first time when you mentioned about they saw the women, wanted to have kids and made giants, whatever. There has to be some other kind of information out there, whether it's archaeological or some other text or from an ancient culture that has information. Seriously, there's more than that one line that's an indication about the Nephilim. And as I was reading through other books as well, and here's where it becomes dicey, you have to remember a lot of this information isn't written in English and it's old. So you have to consider the time period it was written, how language changes over time. Perfect example in our world. When I was growing up, if you said something was sick, it meant illness or not feeling well. Now it has an entirely different meaning. When you said that someone was happy and gay, you weren't talking about their sexual orientation. You were talking about their mood was happy and excited, they were uplifted. So when you're getting into older topics, you have, and especially when you have to translate them from one language to another, there's a lot of different factors to consider. The time frame, what were the meaning of the words? What was the author that you're referring to from the old scripts and things that you're reading? What were they trying to share with their audience at the time? So, for example, we have a number of fiction books. If somebody in the future, digs up or finds a copy of one of the books, if it managed to survive, what would their thoughts be about that particular book? Would they recognize that it's a work of fiction, or would they assume that it's based on events that happened at the time? So again, there's a lot to consider when you're reading, particularly nonfiction, because you have to think of this particular author's motivation for sharing this information. Is it that he did his research, that he was careful about it, and just wanting to share his thoughts on the Nephilim? Was it a money grab and sort of like, oh, right now everybody's writing about the Nephilim, as a number of people did with 2012, and there were a lot of money grab authors then. So you really need to stop and think about, what are you reading? And this is why I don't just read one subject or one book or one website or watch one video and think, oh, now I understand it. I prefer to read numerous different books and check different sources. The Templar Revelation, mentioned in the Da Vinci Code, Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince. I found their name in a couple of other books that I've recently read. not in relation to this book, but some of their other work, so I'll be checking that out. This particular book, The Templar Revelation, Secret Guardians of the True Identity of Christ. And I have to say, I put it aside for a little bit because I'd read quite a bit about the Templars at that point, so I just needed to switch to some other topics for a while. The book wasn't what I expected. It was actually some interesting surprises. Like some of the other books, they have plates and that point out the areas, things they're talking about. And I have to say, reading this was definitely a pleasant surprise. Something I'll talk about more when I get into covering particular books. There's a note and reference section here, as there are in a number of different ones. If I go to the second footnote, so on page 24 is the second footnote, and you know it's a footnote because there's a little number above, and it mentions here, as described in detail in our last book. So then there's number 2. I go to the back, to the notes and references. Number 2, Picnet and Prince, Turin Shroud in whose image. So I know that the reference there is to that particular book. And I'm mentioning that because as an EA for 23 years, and I was mostly in English classes. I was in a number of other classes, but mostly English and high schools. We didn't go through bibliographies and footnotes and how to do that type of thing and make reference to the resources that you're getting. I don't recall doing that very often, and that's unfortunate because we do talk about not plagiarizing other people's work, but the younger generation, with exception of course, but they don't understand that when you're doing this type of work, you really should be mentioning where you got the information, what you're referring to. Your bibliography, you should list all of the resources that you used, whether those are books, websites, articles, etc. So I'll be talking more about that particular type of thing in upcoming videos. Aliens in Ancient Egypt, The Brotherhood of the Serpent, and the Secrets of the Nile Civilization. This is by Xavier Hayes. I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure I enjoyed this one. He's a freelance writer. Sophisticated civilization of ancient Egypt arose seemingly overnight. Personally, I don't think that's accurate when you consider how much desert is around and how little archaeology has actually been able to find. So it may seem like it's the civilization suddenly started, but that just means they haven't found some of the older other civilizations that may have been around there. With the death of Pharaoh Akhenaten, much of this higher knowledge was lost or suppressed. But evidence of this former golden age, the alien visitors behind its rise, and those behind its decline still exists, some of it in plain sight. So this is if you're into kind of conspiracy theories, different ideas. This book is listed as Spirituality, Ancient Mysteries. One of the quotes at the back is by Michael A. Cremo. His name comes up in a number of books. He's the author of Forbidden Archaeology, and I'm pretty sure he has a website. Interestingly enough, the other person here is Marie D. Jones, and I believe she's also someone that has to do with archetypes, so I'll have to double check that. it was an interesting read, some different ideas, twists and turns. And again, I suggest and check out your local library. Another place to see what people are talking about in relation to the books and titles I mentioned is Goodreads. You can type in the name of the book and find different reviews and comments by people on Goodreads. African Temples of the Anunnakai. This is by Michael Tellinger. The Lost Technologies of the Gold Mines of Enki. I found this curious and interesting. He has a number of amazing photos. He talks about different finds in Africa. It's some food for thought. There's certainly a missing link in terms of what archaeologists and others are looking at. This book also reminds me of one which I now wish I had purchased years ago. It was by an archaeologist also working in Africa, and it was titled Gorgons. It had to do with particular types of animals, the mammals, the saurians, and what could potentially have developed if not for the meteorite that wiped out the dinosaur era. So this I found a good read because he, like I say, he talks about these different mounds that are all throughout Africa. The sad thing, like so many other places where archaeologists are trying to come up with information and piece things together, is that, of course, as the human population now at 8 billion, yes, with a B, a lot of these places are being taken over and so much information is being lost. Because even with the pyramids, if you've ever looked at them on Google Maps, you can see there's a highway not far away, which means all that damage and the cities coming closer and all of that stuff has an impact on ancient sites. And again, I'm off on a tangent. So Michael Tellinger also connects in with Zecharia Sitchin. We get into the Sumerians, the Anunnakai, coming here to mine for gold. In June, Where Did They Go? Lost Cities and Vanished Peoples. This is by James Cornell, and I've had this book for over 50 years. It's a small read. I bought it in my public school. It's from Scholastic Book Services. I used to love being able to order books through my school. I've read this way back, even before I was a teenager. It was definitely an introduction to ancient civilizations. We've got Stonehenge. What I found very interesting this time around, because when I'd first heard about Zecharia Sitchin and the Anunnakai and the Sumerians, it didn't ring a bell. It wasn't familiar like ancient Egypt and, of course, King Tut and others that are much more common that we hear about. But when I was reading this, there actually is a chapter on the Sumerians, so it was there just in the background. The Mars Mystery, another book by Graham Hancock. This is the secret connection linking Earth's ancient civilization and the Red Planet. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we've got H.G. Wells and War of the Worlds, which of course is a work of fiction, and there was so much impact when Orson Welles did his radio program. In this book, Graham shares some of the photos, of course, the famous face on Mars. He talks about different things that appear to be pyramids. We've got the probes there, but I mean, again, then you get into the different, is NASA really revealing everything they discover? My big question is, How do these things keep moving on a planet that's, millions of miles away from us? And you think of people who have their little motorized things that are constantly getting stuck. Well, there's nobody on Mars to move this equipment if it gets stuck on a rock or what have you. So part of me is sort of, how is it this equipment is just going along and it's able to transmit information, but I would definitely take what people say about this with a grain of salt, and not because of Graham Hancock, but the reality is people are making assumptions that can't be verified. No one has traveled to Mars and come back to say conclusively, oh yes, I was standing there, this is how high it was, and it looks like a pyramid. Or I was standing there and it looks like a pyramid, but it's actually a natural mountain. The reality is, until someone travels to Mars and comes back, or has a way of transmitting, doing maybe a live stream on YouTube, I don't know. But until that happens, this is all theory and guesswork. And it doesn't mean it isn't an interesting read and some food for thought and hey, I wonder what if or maybe. But I am saying, keep in mind, these are theories and ideas, not proven fact. This is his idea about ancient Egypt, but he relates it to the constellation of the Swan, Cygnus, rather than Orion, which is what most authors that I've read tend to refer to when it comes to ancient Egypt. Authors like Graham Hancock, Robert Bauval, I think Adrian Gilbert, because I'm pretty sure it was Gilbert Bauval who wrote The Orion Mystery, which I had borrowed from the library. I do have one of Bauval's other books that's written with Scotia. But back to Andrew Collins. So this is about the Denisovian legacy, connects to Göbekli Tepe and the birth of Egypt. So he talks about the importance of stars, ancient civilizations. I do have to say I was quite disappointed because he really doesn't get much into the Denisovian culture or finds or archaeology. They're pretty much at the end of the book and not a very big section of it. It's mostly about Cygnus, the constellation, the different events. Again, we have to get into considering translations and the time period. And why I keep coming back to the translations and understanding things. As I've mentioned in an earlier video, English is my second language. My first language is Hungarian. So I understand that when you're switching from one language to another, you're not taking it word for word. And I used to drive my stepmother nuts because when I would talk with my grandmother, we'd be chattering about whatever it was for 5 minutes or so. Then my stepmother would wait for me to translate it and I'd say it in 2 sentences. And she'd be like, well, then why were you talking so much? And I'm like, because I'm not going to translate it word for word. It won't make sense. But here's the gist of what we were saying. And that's an important point to remember because, again, a lot of the information these people are using and looking at was either written in French or German or sometimes Latin. They're trying to decode and decipher ancient Egyptian. And you have to remember, as I commented earlier with another book, words change meaning over time. So unless you know that culture and what was going on at that time, and you have examples, you're really taking your best guess. And I truly believe it's important to remember that. And again, it's nothing against the authors. There are some who have spent decades and longer doing research and gathering their information and going to a variety of sources. A number of them, and can't remember if it was Hancock. There's one of the authors who actually gives credit to the researchers that he worked with and comments on which chapters they contributed, which I think is very honorable and something not a lot of these authors do. Because people have to remember, it may be Andrew Collins who's getting the check for the book and the book deal, but he by no means does everything by himself. There's different photographs they use that were taken by other people. There's other people who do the research for them. There's people who do some of the writing. There's the editors, and hopefully you get a good editor, not like some of the ones that I found that I'll comment in other videos with different books, because it truly boggles my mind the number of editors who miss the fact that "and" does not start a sentence. I'm no grammar guru, but seriously, if I know that, I'm pretty sure someone getting paid to edit a book should know that. I might take that part out. Before Atlantis, 20 million years of human and pre-human cultures. This is by Frank Joseph. He talks about a variety of different ideas, theories, evidence, and again, here we go. Tying in his extensive research into Atlantis and Lemuria, Joseph provides a 20 million year timeline of the rise and fall of ancient civilizations, both human and pre-human, the evolutionary stages of humanity, and the catastrophes and resulting climate changes that triggered them all. In other words, climate change is not new. The Earth has her own, the Earth has her own cycles and different things happen. Events that our relatively young civilization may soon experience. Food for thought. This is Ancient Mysteries and Spirituality. There's a quote here by Brad Steger. He was quite popular and well known around the same time as Erich von Däniken, and it cites here one of his books, Worlds Before Our Own, which I actually just reread not long ago. Ancient Egypt, 39,000 before the Common Era. Now, here's another point in terms of archaeology and trying to understand things hundreds, thousands, or even millions of years later, especially when it comes to language. In the past, when we were referring to before year zero, it would have simply been BC. Then the new format became BCE, before the Common Era. There was another book that I recently read, and I think it may be coming up in July, has an entirely different term. So in just my 59 years around the planet, this has already switched 3 times, referring to the same time period. So when you're reading this type of thing, keep that in mind. Different people use different short forms. The History, Technology, and Philosophy of Civilization X. This is by Edward F. Minkowski. Now, I'm not sure how you come up with the philosophy of a civilization that we haven't really discovered, and you can't go back and visit. So again, this is theory. It's putting together what he came across, the translations, the time periods, all of that type of thing. So for me, these type of books aren't so much, oh, you figured it out. It's more, there's something to think about. Another book by Edward F. Malkowski is Before the Pharaohs, Egypt's Mysterious Prehistory. Now again, people are assuming that Egypt just sprang up and there was no practice writing and all these skills just suddenly developed, astronomy and math, what have you. So this is his ideas. Much of the past support for prehistoric civilization has relied on esoteric traditions and mythic narrative, using hard scientific evidence from the fields of archaeology, genetics, engineering, and geology, as well as sacred and religious texts. Malkowski shows that these mythic narratives are based on actual events and that a highly sophisticated civilization did once exist prior to those of Egypt and Sumer. Tying its cataclysmic fall to the mysterious disappearance of Cro-Magnon culture, Before the Pharaohs offers a compelling new view of humanity's past. And I do like that he ties in a number of different fields. In other words, you're not just going to find, geologists aren't going to find the answers alone. Astronomers aren't going to find it alone. Archaeologists aren't going to find it alone. It has to be a collaboration of people working and talking and sharing and communicating together that will come up with the answers. I did enjoy reading this. Again, food for thought. The Shining Ones, yet another book that waited patiently until the right time. This is the completely revised and updated version, The World's Most Powerful Secret Society Revealed. I can't say I really agreed with it. This is Philip Gardner and Gary Osborne. On the back, The Shining Ones reveals traces of their influence, referring to these initiates, in all major world religions, including Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, and shamanic traditions, decodes the secrets of their knowledge, deeply embedded in their symbolic language of art, architecture, myth, legend, and works of literature, even the Bible. Asks whether there is really a worldwide conspiracy directing our course and where it is leading. It was some food for thought, but now that I've read it, and I mean it connects in with the symbols, Robert Langdon would probably enjoy this book. But yeah, we'll see how I feel when I go through it the second time for notes and connecting with timelines, because of course this ties in with chakras, left and right brain, talks about priesthoods, different belief systems and cultures, where we're going. Does have plates, so that again was interesting. An index, so if you're looking for something in particular, their bibliography, which is several pages long. So I'm not really sure about this one, but I'll talk more about that later. The Secret Chamber of Osiris and The Great Pyramid Hoax, both of these are by Scott Crichton. If you've read one, then you're pretty much okay without the other one. I only know that because I've read both. This one has a foreword by Rand Flamath, a Canadian librarian, and I have a book coming up by Rand and his wife regarding Atlantis. So again, the foreword caught my interest because it was by an author I had read. Basically, these two books talk about obviously the Great Pyramid, and the main focus is whether Howard Weiss actually found a cartouche in the pyramid or whether it was somehow put there by other people that he was working with. talks about how it's now harder to get to the pyramids. There are armed guards and fences and a lot of things that are, I guess you can take a look at it two ways. Are all these things in place to protect the monuments so that not too many people are there and hinky things aren't going on? Or is it that some of these areas have been closed off because there's different things that have been found and they don't want to share it with the general public? I don't know. That's up to the individual and their research and their own experiences to determine. I'm still on the fence with that one. That was my April, May, and June reading. So now that I'm finally caught up with those, the next time I do a video like this will be early October, when I'll cover where I went July, August, September. If you're interested in any of these titles and where I'm going to go and talk about them or how they connect in with each other, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you know when I upload the specific book or topic that you're interested in. If you found this video of benefit and you enjoyed it, be sure to hit the like button. I'd also appreciate if you leave me a comment, whether it's a thumbs up, a little smiley face, or something in terms of the video, as likes and comments help my channel and our community grow. And I'm really hoping that at some point we start getting some conversations going and see where this whole YouTube journey is taking me. Thank you for sharing your gift of your time with me. I very much appreciate it. And until next time, happy reading.